Welcome to Collars Calluses, a working theology for young men, where grit meets grace and faith meets the workbench, where young men can come to learn how to grow in the strength, wisdom, and courage that God calls them to. In a world confused about manhood, we open God's Word and roll up our sleeves. We'll talk theology that's not just for the classroom, but for the job site, the gym, the family table, and the front lines of life. We are about forging biblical masculinity that works in the real world for real men to the glory of God. This is Collars and Calluses. Let's get to work. Welcome to another episode of Collars and Calluses. Rich and I are here with you again. We are picking up themes that we're talking about in Proverbs, particularly right now. We're focusing for a while on the sexual mission of young men. And over the last couple of episodes, we've been talking about avoiding Harlot Folly. And we talked last time about kind of the foundation of avoiding Harlot Folly and listening to your fathers and your mothers, as Solomon encouraged. But the real foundation for all of it is faith. That is, you have to believe what God says about you and the world around you and about himself and your relationship with him, understanding the consequences of sin that he's laid out. And that's what we're going to get into today, because Solomon speaks about those consequences and they become somewhat roadblocks. If you know you're going to do something and it's going to have bad consequences, you generally try to avoid it. If you know that you stick your hand in the fire and it's going to burn, it's going to hurt your hand, you generally avoid that. And one of the things Solomon's telling his son is that there are consequences that come with sexual sin. Harlot Folly is not without her price. And I'm not talking about just simply the price of a prostitute. I'm talking about her price or consequences. And so she comes with a lot of problems. And one of the problems one of the consequences of sin, one of the losses that you have if you fall prey to Harlot Folly, which is sexual immorality, Solomon says is the loss of honor. In chapter 5 of Proverbs, verses 9 and 10, he says, "Lest you give your honor to others and your years to the merciless, lest strangers take their fill of your strength and your labors go to the house of a foreigner." Now, as we are recording this today, news dropped within the last 24 hours of the University of Michigan's head football coach, Sharon Moore, having lost his job over sexual immorality. He had a job where he was making $6 million a year. He had 3 years left on his contract. I don't know if they were going to keep him around for much longer, but he did have a buyout if he just could hold on to the job and be fired without cause. But he threw it all away. His assistant, he had this sinful relationship with her. He has a wife and 3 children, and he threw away his honor. And it wasn't just his honor as the splendor or majesty that he has as a coach or even as simply a man, but also money, everything. He's losing his reputation. He's losing his vocation. It's going to be very difficult for him to find a job. The honor that Solomon speaks about particularly is the crown of accomplishment, and that includes money. It includes all the respect that comes with your position. The young man's honor comes through fearing Yahweh and the works he does as he walks in the way of wisdom, his dominion activity. Now, if you're controlled by your sexual passions, if you're not self-disciplined within the mission of marriage, if your sexual passions consume you, giving yourself over to their pursuit, making them the focus of your life, you're not going to be productive. If you're consumed all the time with just thinking about sex, which I know it is a predominant thought in men's lives, but if you're consumed all the time pursuing these passions, you're not going to be productive and you'll lose the things that you indeed produce. Rich, do you have any thoughts about the loss of honor in falling in with Harlot Folly?
Well, something we've talked about already is that sexual sin on the part of men is a form of effeminacy,
Right.
living for luxury and pleasure rather than for the mission God has given to you. And it's really important to keep in mind, Proverbs 7 comes after Proverbs 5. So Proverbs 5 has already affirmed the goodness of sex within marriage, of sexual desire, Proverbs 5 is this celebration of sex within marriage, but then you come to Proverbs 7 and you have all these warnings. And so Proverbs 5 is the right kind of sexual relationship. Proverbs 7 is the wrong kind. And so I point that out because it's always important. I think sometimes when the church has taught on this issue, we've only started with the no or with the dangers of sexuality. And I think one of the problems with a certain version of the Christian faith, sometimes that's the way that it's taught, is we start with the fall instead of starting with creation, and
Hmm.
we end at the cross instead of the resurrection and consummation. So you
Hmm.
start with the fall, and all you see is everything is tainted. This is why some people end up as teetotalers. All they can see in alcohol is the danger, not the goodness of God's gift that then can be twisted and abused, but just the fact that everything is dangerous. So starting with fall, ending with the cross, you get, it seems like everything's tainted, and then you get the solution to sin and forgiveness through the cross, but then that's it. And there's not really any sense of this new life that we're called to live, the fact that we're united to the risen Christ, that we have new life. And
Hmm.
so the no is definitely there. The warnings are definitely there, but in this book, they're enveloped by God's much bigger yes. So what you want to do is say yes to God's design and no to those things that would reject that design or that would violate that design. And I think that's really what this passage is about. It's got to be said in its right context. And yes, with sexual sin, there's absolutely a loss of honor. There is a loss of masculine honor. I think that's really important to understand to
Hmm.
be able to view. So you think about this. Men who sin with pornography or sin sexually in other kinds of ways very often realize afterwards, wow, I feel emasculated after that.
Hmm.
I feel ashamed of what I've done. I feel ashamed of who I am as a man. Well, that's telling you something. Shame is a form of pain in the conscience that tells you something is wrong, something has gone wrong here. And Proverbs has got these warnings to avoid that. But again, it's important to understand those warnings are enveloped by the affirmation of God's beautiful design. God wants you to have sexual pleasure. God wants you
Right.
to enjoy this gift that He has given to you and your wife in the covenant of marriage. He wants you to enjoy that. But it's got to be in the right place. The flip side of that is that when a man has sex with his wife, there's no shame or emasculation or loss of honor involved in it at all. You
Right.
know, it's what you call a pure pleasure. So that's what Solomon, I think, is really getting at in terms of the big picture here.
Yeah, I'm working off what you just said as far as the honor, and that is the again the flip side of it. God wants you to have honor. This is He created you for glory. Sin, as Romans 3:23 says, we all sin and come short of the glory of God. God has wants us to pursue glory. He wants us to be glorious. He wants us to have dominion. He wants us to have all the things that come with dominion. And Solomon is saying, look, I'm trying to prevent you from losing what God wants you to have.
Yeah,
God
that's a
wants,
great way to put it.
yeah, God wants you to have all these wonderful things. And if you do this, you're going to lose it all. It's like a guy, a seasoned investor telling you, man, if you put your money there, if you invest in that, you're going to lose everything.
Yeah,
Don't do that. And God is telling you, look, don't do that because it looks like this is a small price. In fact, Solomon tells his son in chapter 6, verse 26, for the price of a prostitute is only a loaf of bread, but a married woman hunts down a precious life. There's some questions about the translation of that verse and consequently its interpretation. I believe the prostitute and the married woman are the same person, but basically she sells herself rather cheaply on the front end. This isn't going to cost you anything. It's just going to be a loaf of bread. It's just a small price to pay. This tryst is low cost at the beginning. It's not going to take too much of your honor because the bread is a product of your dominion. And this is your produce. It's not like it's going to empty out your bank account or anything. It's just going to be this small price, but then all of a sudden it turns into his entire life. He's taking away everything. This small investment grows very large in all the wrong ways. And Solomon is warning his son, look, this woman is going to take everything. Now, I think we've seen a lot of that. And I'm not saying that every case is like that, but in our American court systems, we see this even with getting into bad marriages with women like this, where they really just take everything a man has ever earned. And I know a lot of guys in the manosphere have talked about this. They marry the wrong types of women. They involve themselves with the wrong types of women, and it just costs them everything. And it's a bad investment. Solomon is warning him, look, you need to know who you're marrying. You need to know the woman you're getting involved with, and she needs to be wise. She needs to be Lady Wisdom. Don't jump into this because she's cute. Don't jump into this just because you're initially attracted to her. There's lots of things to go into this relationship, and be careful because you can lose your honor.
Yeah, and she is manipulative, and the man is naive enough to be manipulated by her.
Yes.
And I think that's a big part of this as well. So you have to be, again, wise about all of this.
And that's where the man's strength has to come in, and your strength in resisting, well, the wisdom that you have to discern through these, but also the strength to resist the temptation to fall in with her and to get involved with her in the first place. And so it does require masculine strength. Any idiot can succumb to temptation. Any weak man can just fall into temptation. It takes a strong man to say no to himself. And you have to develop that strength as a man. So, so you can lose your honor, but there's also, Solomon also says there's a lot of regret. And you brought this up just a minute ago, but there's regret that comes with, and the shame that comes with involving yourself with harlot folly and sexual immorality. He says in chapter 5, verses 11 to 14, and at the end you groan when your flesh and body are consumed, and you say, how I hated discipline, and my heart despised reproof. I did not listen to the voice of my teachers or incline my ear to my instructors. I am at the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. Now, when the consequences come home for a long-term lack of sexual discipline and sin, there'll be regret in the face of punishment. I mentioned a minute ago that Sharon Moore, has gotten caught and been fired. There are also reports that he threatened suicide. He loses all of this because of this tryst with this woman. And he regrets it to the point where he's willing to give up his life. Solomon's talking about these things. I've ruined my life. I'm at the brink of utter destruction. And so there's a lot of regret that comes with it because there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of shame that comes with that. And so you do have to be careful as a young man, because the law, and this is one of those things that we as men and as Christians in general have to continue to think about, is that we live with the long-term goal in mind. We are not about short-term gratification. Living by faith means living in the hope of God's promises for the future. God promises you things in the future, and you have to patiently endure to receive those promises. So you cannot just give in to all the things that you want to in instant gratification. So there will be regret for it. So do you have anything on that, Rich?
Yeah. So one other thing that I think is striking is typically when we think of sexual sin, we think of a man pressuring a woman into sexual sin, seducing her, pressuring her in various ways. And obviously that's wrong. But it's really interesting. You think about the story of Joseph with Potiphar's wife.
Right.
She is the aggressor. In Proverbs chapter 7, it's the woman who is sort of throwing herself at the man. And so I think it goes without saying that a man should not be pursuing something sexual with a woman who's not his wife, pressuring her into some kind of sexual activity, obviously. But the warning here is that women can be the seducer. And women can, and this happens a lot, and this certainly happens in our culture. But what Proverbs is saying is that not only do you have to guard yourself so that you don't pursue something, so that you're not the one who's doing the seducing, but you also have to guard yourself against being seduced. And the reality is, in our culture, we are surrounded by this because and we've talked about this before. What do you see all around our culture? Immodesty. You do have women who will be the sexual aggressors. You do have women who will pursue a man, not because they actually are interested in, say, having an honorable marriage with him, but they want something he has. Maybe they want access to his resources or the status that would come with it or something like that. So Solomon he's instructing his son here. Not only does he have to guard his own heart so that his desires are held in check and disciplined and channeled in the right kind of way. But he's also got to be on guard against people who, against females, against women who would seek to be, who would seek to seduce him.
Right.
So it's really, really important to recognize that because we live in a culture in which we as men are surrounded by, if not real seductive women in real life, certainly in other ways.
Right.
So you just have to constantly be on your guard in both ways.
You have to learn how to fight girls. That's right. So
There you
in the proper way. Now, just two of the other negative warnings that Solomon gives about which are should be impediments to you pursuing sexual immorality is that Solomon says one day you're going to face judgment, and if you have been sexually immoral, you're going to face eternal death. This is not. This isn't. This we're not. He's not playing games here. God doesn't slap people on the wrist for this. In Proverbs 5:21, he says, "A man's ways," and this is all within the context of this harlot folly and your interactions with her. He said, "A man's ways are before the eyes of Yahweh, and he ponders all his paths." Hebrews 13:4 says, God will judge fornicators and adulterers." So there's a judgment coming, and they do not inherit the kingdom of God. So that is, again, we have discussed the positive mission, and God wants us to have all these wonderful things. And he says, if you don't pursue what I've told you to do, these are the negative consequences. There are two ways, and you have to choose. And death, eternal death, is the result. And one of the warnings that Solomon gives his son is that, and I'll put it kind of in modern parlance here, that you think you're going to be the one to be able to tame harlot folly. You think you're the one who's going to be able to escape the consequences. You always think, I'm not going to be the one who gets caught. I'm not going to be the one who falls prey to all these things.
I'm sure that's what the Michigan coach was thinking.
Exactly. I can escape it. One of the things that Solomon tells his son is that many strong men who've gone before you have thought the very same thing. And you know where they are? He said, they're all dead.
They're all in hell.
They're all in hell. He said, you're not going to be the exception. So don't think that you can outmaneuver God on this. You cannot. You can't. Just as if there's a brick wall in front of you and you think you can run through it, all you have to do is just run into it and find out that you can't. So it is with the reality in sexual sin. Even though it's not as obvious as the brick wall, it is more real than the brick wall because God said it. And you need to understand that death is the result, eternal death is the result of this unrepentant sexual immorality.
Yeah. So what I would add to that, Bill, is that I think we are all familiar with sad cases of apostasy. Someone who appeared to be a Christian, they're baptized, they're church members, they look like they're doing everything right. They say the right things. They seem to be living the right way. And then they get derailed and they fall away. I cannot tell you how often this happens because of sexual sin. If you were to rank, like, what are the biggest things that lead to apostasy and cause people to fall away from the Christian faith? Cause them, now people talk about deconstructing. Right. Ex-evangelicals, people who were evangelicals, they left it. They've now, quote unquote, deconstructed their faith again and again and again and again and again and again. It is because they wanted the forbidden fruit of some kind of sexual pleasure that violated God's law and violated God's design, but they just couldn't control themselves. They could not. So when you say that the battle over sexual fidelity, sexual faithfulness it's really rooted in faith, that is absolutely true. How many people have decided, this has kind of been a standard trope now for a number of years, that if somebody goes off to college, they start sleeping around, and then they decide, I'm not really so sure that the Bible is really the Word of God. I've got lots of questions about that.
Yeah.
I'm not really so sure that Jesus rose from the dead. But that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But they did not lead with the intellectual. This was not an intellectual problem they suddenly had. It was a sin problem, particularly in the area of sex. And the standard question is, whenever somebody who's been walking faithfully with the Lord starts to, like say a single young man university context or something like that, starts to question his faith, the first question is, what's her name and when did you start sleeping with her?
Exactly.
Because you're trying to justify the sexual sin by revising your theology so it won't be a sin anymore.
Right.
And so this really is, in a sense, the battle of life and death. Again, that's how Jesus presents it in Matthew chapter 5. You can either fight against sexual sin or you can go to hell. Those are your two choices. You can fight against lust or you can go to hell. Those are the only two options. This is not the only sin you have to fight against, obviously. But again, this is one that I think derails lots and lots and lots of, I would say, especially young men and women. But hey, look at the Michigan coach. It derails older. And apparently he was a professing Christian. I don't know much about him. But so this is something that can get people of all different ages. It's not a temptation that just disappears at some point in your life or disappears when you get married or whatever. It's something that you have to be vigilant in fighting against, and you've got to understand the stakes.
Yeah, you were talking about the deconstruction. I think we've seen that over the year. We'll probably name names. One of the names that came to my mind was Joshua Harris.
Yeah, I was thinking of him too.
Yeah, the I Kissed Dating Goodbye. I mean, he wrote the book on courtship and sexual purity at the height of sexual, that whole Christian.
Now he marches in LGBTQ parades.
Yeah,
he direct his family. There's a lot of cases of that kind of thing. Absolutely, a lot of men and women both who were sort of high-profile Christians. Derek Webb would be another. I don't know much about him, but Christian musician, and became a sexual pervert. So yeah, there are a lot of cases of this kind of thing. So the flip side of this, so on the one hand, if you pursue sex outside of God's design, you will find your sexual desires insatiable.
Right.
You'll never be satisfied. And actually, there's a law of diminishing returns at work there. And this is why people move into more and more perverse forms of sexuality. Right. First, it might be with a woman, and then it gets more and more perverse. And next thing, a man's gone off into sodomy or some other kind of perversion. This is a well-established fact with the use of pornography, that it gets more and more weird and perverse the longer people are into it. And one thing, there was an interesting article that came out on this recently. One thing we should do is be real honest about what porn addiction is. It's not a porn addiction, it's a masturbation addiction. I mean, let's call it what it is. Because when you put it that way, it's like, oh, that is pretty disgusting. So I think it's important to recognize that. But the flip side of that is that when you do honor God's design and you seek to do things right, you get increasing satisfaction, increasing joy over time. And that's what Proverbs 5, again, is about, is the increasing sexual satisfaction and joy that you get in your relationship with your wife when you do things according to God's design. So you earlier mentioned sin, the way it's described or defined in Romans chapter 3. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. God wants us to be glorious, and that glory includes honor, it includes joy, it includes a whole host of things make up that honor. When you live according to God's design, there's a glory in that. There's an honor, there's a joy, there's a satisfaction, there's an inner peace that you get. When you violate God's design, when you break God's law in this area or really any other, you miss out on that glory. And instead of that glory, what you get is shame. To fall short of the glory means that you've fallen into shame. And sexual sin in particular brings a very strong sense of shame, because we all know innately that this is a misuse of our sexual powers, the sexuality that God gave to us. So this is so important to understand that. And this, when you have a lot of contexts in which young people are taught, well, you should avoid sex before marriage because you might get pregnant, you might get somebody pregnant, you might get an STD, and they kind of list all the bad things that will happen. I'm like, well, yeah, a lot of bad things will happen. Really, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to go to hell for all eternity. That's what's going to happen. So don't just focus on those short-term losses, because you might be able to talk yourself out of those things. Yeah, that won't happen to me. But yes, this will happen to you. This is where sexual sin leads. It leads to the grave. It leads to death. It leads to eternal conscious torment. I'll say that, since I saw recently where Kirk Campbell was abandoned the biblical teaching on hell. So eternal conscious torment.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that I have to cover sometime in premarital counseling, depending on who I'm counseling, the sexual history, is that sexual history, just to put it lightly, kind of as a euphemism there, is not irredeemable, but it does create a lot of bonding issues that have to be overcome in marriage.
Yeah.
And when you are involved, whether it's in pornography or in sexual intercourse with others before marriage, when you decide you want to be married and you get married, there are lots of problems that come bonding. Well, and the men and women are different in this way, but they still both have problems with bonding issues. And it's the long-term effects again, if you're just thinking short term, you're going it's going to be a problem because the long-term effects are bad and you want to avoid that. You want to prepare yourself for marriage the best way you can. And that is avoiding all these things, uh, avoiding harlot folly in this way. And that's what we're going to talk about now, just hopefully some practical ways to do that. How do you avoid her? And really speaking to the situations that you have as young men right now. Some of those situations Rich and I did not have when we were younger. But as Rich mentioned, there's still, even after, for me, 35 years of marriage, you still have issues, you still have temptations, and that you still have to deal with them. And we have modern technology as well. We're not young, we're not 15, we're not 20, 21, 25, whatever.
Or
However,
35.
or 35, or I'm not even 55. I'm north of 55 now. So, but there's still temptations, and we all, as men, we all have to avoid them. And so Solomon talks to his son, and he says at the beginning of chapter 7, "For at the window of my house I looked out through my lattice, and I've seen among the simple, I have perceived among the youths a young man lacking sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness." Now, one of the things I think I mentioned in a previous podcast about this context is Solomon is painting a picture here that he has perspective. He is looking basically from his balcony over, and he's watching this whole situation play out. He can see what's going to happen. He knows what's happening. He knows how this man's going to operate. He's watching. He says, this guy's headed to the wrong direction. He knows it. He's moving that way. And look at it. It's a trap. But the fact is, first of all, he went near her house. He flirted with temptation. He knew where he was. He's simple. He's not stupid, but he's simple, which means he's the opposite of wise. And so he simply goes near her house, but
he's naive is the way would be the way to put that.
Yeah, he's naive. This isn't going to be a big deal. Now we might think, well, he's talking about going near a brothel or something like that. Of course, that would apply. But there are other ways that we go near her house. Today, we don't have to go by a brothel. There are links that can be provided for you in your DMs. These people are spamming you, and they're wanting you to get on these websites. They're wanting you to be on OnlyFans. They're wanting you to be a paying customer. You go near her house, you flirt with these things. I have found, and I just personally, and I do Access X, usually for what's going on, what's trending, but I stopped looking at what's trending because I found out if you go to what's trending, and this is just me personally, but if you go to what's trending, these people slip things in with keywords on all this. It doesn't matter if you're looking at the news of the day or whatever, somehow they slip things in and they want you to look at their porn sites or whatever. So you have to avoid that. You just have to say, well, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do that. Paul, I'm jumping way ahead. Solomon says, keep your way far from her and do not go near the door of her house in chapter 5, verse 8. He said, the most spiritual thing you can do is flee. It's just don't go near. And sometimes a lot of guys think, well, what I need to do is have the psychological, emotional strength to be able to walk by her house and not succumb to temptation. And Solomon saying, really, the best thing to do is just stay away from her. If you can possibly do that, stay away from her. If you're, I know I'm from Louisiana. If you're somewhere around the French Quarter and you're prone to temptation, probably you shouldn't be walking down Bourbon Street. Okay. Because there's too much stuff going on down there. Same thing on the internet, things like that. Just stay away, walk a different direction. But that brings us to something else too. When he says walk a different direction, he's not simply saying just stay away, but there are to be positive pursuits in your life, things to occupy your time, a mission that we've talked about previously in other podcasts. You're to have positive pursuits to fill your time. When my sons were young, teenagers, and I know our family had a lot of a lot of jawing about how we spent a lot of time in the weight room. That wasn't the first thing I tried with my boys. I grew up hunting and fishing, and then we moved to the city. And my grandpa had me in the woods all the time. That's all we were doing all the time, probably year round, hunting and fishing. All right, so I occupied my time with that. Well, I moved to the city, and we tried to find some things for them to do. And with four boys, the sports were team sports, which I love, were just too much for a family. We were going just 6 nights a week trying to do baseball, things like that. So I said, what can we do? And what can we do? What can I do with my boys? They were all homeschooled, and so they needed physical education. So we tried swimming for a while, swimming laps. They hated that. I did too much cardio. And so got them into weights. And we got a lot of jaw from people about, oh, all y'all do is lift weights, and they thought it was vanity stuff. But one of the reasons why I did that with my son, well, all four of my sons, is to occupy them. I had them get jobs as soon as they could. They were 13, 14 years old working for people, but I also had them weightlifting because I wanted them as much as possible. Once they started seeing progress in the weight room, it began to motivate them to do better, to do more. And it gave them focus. It wasn't about them becoming bodybuilders or power lifters or anything like that. It was simply to give them focus during that time while they were in their teenage years. And I also got to do that with them, which I enjoyed, which we enjoyed together. It was something we could talk about and something we could do together, something we could study together and have fun together. But it gave them a positive pursuit. And also, when they got home after working and lifting, things like that, they were really tired and wanted to go to bed. And so the thought of staying up and surfing the web and things like that, they were pretty much out of the picture. And I'm not saying they avoided all temptations all the time. I'm saying they had a positive pursuit. That's one of the reasons why I did that. Now, that is not the answer for everybody, but especially if you're a father of young boys and coming up, one of the things that you have to do, especially if you have a large family, like some of the people who probably listen to this podcast, you either have a large family or you're planning to have a large family. You're going to have to find, unless you're extremely wealthy, you're going to have to find creative ways to spend time with your sons and keep them occupied and keep them focused on things and to have these positive pursuits. And I would encourage you to be creative in that, whatever you can do. Okay. But something that's physical, something that not only expends the testosterone, but also will help sustain it and increase it, because that's a good thing. It gives them drive, it gives them focus, and it's good to help them work their bodies. So, Rich, what did you do with John?
Oh, very, very similar. I think, yeah, if you're a father with sons, this is what I did with my son. Very similar. Get him working at an early age and,
Yep.
and find work for them to do. Get them in the weight room, sports. Idle hands are the devil's workshop.
Right.
So I think staying busy and thinking of these things and in the kind of in the category of mission that we've talked about, you're improving yourself, you're learning a work ethic, you're getting stronger, you're gaining skills and competencies in different areas which enable you to take dominion. All of that for boys should start at a very early age. So by the time a boy is really wrestling with sexual temptation, he's also got all these other things that are filling his life. And
Right.
it's good to fall in bed exhausted at the end of the day.
So when
That'll
did
get out of a
when
lot of trouble right there.
yeah, when did you buy the Chevy so that y'all could be really occupied with working on a vehicle?
Well, before that, we had started that with the Forerunner by the time he was 15.
Yeah.
So that working on cars together was definitely something. But then also, I would say for dads, one of the most important things you can do is whatever set of skills you have, pass them along to your son so that your ceiling becomes your son's floor,
Right.
so that he can build on what you've done and go further.
Absolutely.
So, and that's one thing that I think has not really happened. And some of this is because you got changing technology and a lot of the skills maybe that previous generations knew were obsolete. And maybe to some degree that will be true of skills we tried to pass on, they'll become obsolete unless you're into like AI robot repair or something like that. But still, I would say passing along as many skills as you can because with competence comes confidence. So yeah, like if it, so obviously keeping boys busy, keeping them focused on things is really, really good. It's a way to stay out of trouble and not just sexual trouble, but other kinds of trouble as
Right.
well. But I would also say that for learning the satisfaction of a job well done, learning how to
Mhm.
work hard in the hot sun, learning a variety of skills that will come in handy throughout the course of your life. And all of that, I think, is just incredibly significant and really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And that's one of those we've talked about the whole fatherlessness epidemic and that kind of thing in the past too. That's one of those things that in our society doesn't really happen the way that it used to. And so that's why people often turn to YouTube or wherever to kind of they want to learn how to do something. Where are you going to turn? Well, today that's where a lot of people do turn. But I would say that the more you can teach your son and pass along to him, make him very mission oriented and dominion oriented. And that means wide ranging skills. I would say learning a musical instrument is really, really
Mhm.
good. We did that some with our kids, but didn't push it too hard. But I think that's a real, like you look at David, when we're first introduced to David in First Samuel 16, he's still a young boy,
Mhm.
basically. He's certainly not 20. But he's when we're first introduced to him, he's introduced as somebody. They're looking for a musician who can play music for Saul. And one of Saul's servants says, "Well, I know a guy." And it turns out, it's David, but he's a good musician. It talks about how he is persuasive with his speech or wise with his speech. He's got valor and military skill already. So exactly
Mhm.
what that means is hard to say, but we do know he killed a lion and a bear.
Right.
So those are transferable skills. So you get this, you meet David in First Samuel 16. He's still a young man and he's like a Renaissance man. He's like this well-rounded
Mhm.
man who's got wide-ranging competencies. He knows, and of course, on top of all that, it says he's handsome. So this is the guy who's like, think about the guy who's the star of the football team and the valedictorian and the best musician in the school orchestra, and he's the best leading guy in his class. I mean, that's David. Now, obviously, not all of us can do that. Not all of us are going to be able to accomplish all of those things, but I think that's being set forth as a kind of ideal for masculinity. It's the epitome of masculinity. And he's just got all these different skills. And they're skills that in some cases we would put in two very different categories. Like a lot of times we think, oh, the guy who's going to be good at music is going to have no chance of being good on the battlefield.
Right.
But David is a blue collar scholar. David is he's the man who is he can talk philosophy or theology with you, and he can also fix your car when it breaks down. He's just got wide ranging skills, and that's the kind of man that we want to develop our boys into.
Right.
There's that old saying, specialization is for insects. Now, I realize that in today's world, you probably do have to specialize in something to make a living. That's a reality. But the goal should be to pass along as many skills, to develop as many skills and competencies as possible, to
Right.
make yourself, because manhood's about usefulness. It's about being able to do stuff. And that's what David is. He's got he's got range. There's
Yeah.
actually a book that came out a while back called Range, and it's one of the things it was about. And that is an interesting book, not a great book, but a good book. And I think that's what we need: aim at range. And again, insofar as this ties into the main topic at hand, sexual temptation, yeah, staying busy and being focused on a broader mission and being able to develop yourself in all these different ways and working hard so you're tired at the end of the day is a really good antidote to a lot. That will keep you out of a lot of trouble.
Absolutely. It will take some planning.
It does. It does.
As it is said, nature hates a void, and so or a vacuum. And so something is going to take your time. And if you're not proactive in lining out your days to be productive, something's going to come and try to fill that. And so you have to be active in doing something. So it's not, don't just get up and just float down the river like a piece of driftwood. Um, get up, line out your day. What am I doing today? Where am I going? What am I going to be
What am I
doing?
going to accomplish? How am I going to be better at the end of the day than I was at the start?
Right, right. And like James Clear talks about in his book, Atomic Habits, I just want to get 1% better. That's it. And I want to move forward. And so with those types of goals in mind, with that incremental, and I think Solomon talks about that too, but that's another topic for another day. But it's like, how am I going to be productive? How am I going to get better today? And one of those things is going to be avoiding Harlot Folly, but I'm going to be doing that by being productive in other areas. And as I chase my mission, the woman will come along. You'll find her, believe me. Now the Harlot Folly, is going to be insistent. She's going to try to insert herself into your life with it, and she's going to try to flirt with you. She's going to try to find you. She sees you, especially a productive man. She's going to try to find you like that. She's going to try to knock you off your mission. You've got to be ready for that. Now, so there are ways, and I call them avoidance methods that we have to deal with things like porn, things like that. There are pros and cons to the avoidance method. One of the big cons that I found is when you focus on avoidance method, it's like telling yourself, don't think about a giraffe. I didn't use elephant. Don't think about a giraffe. And if I tell myself all the time, don't think about a giraffe, all I'm thinking about is a giraffe. I dealt with a guy one time who was in this accountability group for his excessive porn problem, sinful porn problem. And all they did was sit around and talk about their porn problem. And it was like, dude, uh, that's, you're just thinking about porn. That's all you're doing all the time. There's no problem having accountability with people. But if you're just sitting around talking about it all the time, you're not doing anything. And it's going to increase the problem. And it did, by the way. All it did was increase the problem. So you can have avoidance methods. Filters on your computer are good. Things like covenant eyes, accountability is good. But you need to understand this. And this is one of the things I told my sons, and I've told many young men uh, other than my sons, is that those are speed bumps.
Yeah,
Those
that's right.
those things will hopefully slow you down, but they're not sure stops.
Yeah.
If your heart is not right, if your heart longs for it, some of you guys are IT guys. You can find ways to get around all these filters and not leave a trace. If you really want it, you can get to it. And so ultimately, it's a matter of the heart. And so you've got to understand that. And yes, again, filters and accountability, those are good things. And so you can use them, but understand ultimately that those things aren't the final solution. Um, Now, a lot of people you deal with, having dealt with people through the years, it's like, why do you look at pornography? Why are you sexually active outside the bounds of marriage? And it'll be, well, it's complex, Pastor. It's complex. Well, no, it's not complex. It's difficult. It's not complex. So it's difficult to say no to yourself. It's difficult to turn the thing off. It's difficult to say no to your urges. And I realize that a lot of things shape us from our childhood and throughout our lives and traumas and things like that. And I've experienced some of those things myself, and I'm not going to get into all that, but none of those is an excuse for sin. They need to be dealt with. Yes, you may need to talk to somebody about those things, but you need to understand that this is not something that you must do because you've experienced some type of trauma or even fatherlessness in your life. Actually, in a lot of ways, this is quite simple. It's just difficult. It's just difficult. So don't make it harder than it is. Solomon says, don't go by her house, avoid her, focus on productive activities. Think about those times. It's interesting that Solomon situates this in the darkness. He says it's the twilight, it's the darkness. And That's darkness covers your eyes, and so that you're losing discernment. It's a time when judgment's not good. One of the things that you have to do if you're having problems with pornography is like, when am I most susceptible? When is my judgment not good? Is it when I'm tired? Is it when I'm bored? Is it when I'm depressed? And then you have to put a plan in place to deal with those things ahead of time so that you avoid the temptation, because you need to be aware, and you are responsible to be aware of when your weak times are. And so those are the things that you do. Now, you may have thought that we would get on here and give you all sorts of little tricks and magic bullets to avoid sexual temptation, but there really aren't any. Again, it's difficult, but you're called to do difficult things and to become stronger through it. Rich, do you have any counsel on avoiding sexual temptation?
I think you covered it really well, Bill. I think that's really good.
All right. Well, the last thing I wanted to talk about, and we'll go just a little bit longer today, because we want to finish this up. One of the last ways to avoid Harlot Folly is to focus on your marriage. Rich brought this up a little earlier. In chapter 5, verses 15 to 19, it's a beautiful description of marriage and the sexual relationship of marriage. It said, drink water from your own cistern. By the way, that's for those from West Virginia, that's a big thing that holds water. It's not the King James way of saying your sister. Just making sure you understand. Drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breast fill you at all times with delight, be intoxicated always in her love. Now, the thing is, the son may not be married at this particular time. In fact, it looks like Solomon is telling him, you're looking for a wife. You're looking, and you got these two choices, two women. So it may be that he's not married at this time. We can't say for certain. But if he is unmarried, he's still to be focused on preparing himself to become the husband he's supposed to be. And that includes preparing himself sexually. And again, we talked about this in another episode. One of the things that you're supposed to be doing as a young man is making yourself a marriageable man, someone that Lady Wisdom will be attracted to. And that involves a lot of things. And one of the things is, don't carry around a large amount of sexual baggage into marriage. Dealing with pornography, for instance, because that's one of the big issues. When I'm dealing with premarital counseling, it always comes up. And for young men nowadays, if it's not 100% of the time, it's 99% of the time. They've at least been exposed to it, and maybe not had huge issues, but have had lots of exposure to it. I've compared it when I've been asked, especially by parents, is this a huge problem? Well, it's kind of like dealing with stages of cancer. Are you stage 1 or are you stage 5? Rich mentioned earlier how somebody progresses into more and more deviancy. I think you got that principle in Romans 1, beginning verse 18, how that sexual sin just continues to pile up, and you move from this heterosexual sin to all sorts of homosexuality and lots of deviancy. When dealing with guys who are into pornography, some guys are in stage 1. That is, they've been exposed to it, but they're not really caught by it. But then there are guys who are farther along who are really becoming overwhelmed by it. The guy who's stage 4 is not a marriageable man. He needs to get that under control and be away from it before he should be married. Do you think that, Rich?
I would totally agree with that. Yeah. Doug Wilson has made that point. I mean, one thing is, if pornography has been a struggle for you, as it is for so many young men in today's world, obviously you don't have the gift of celibacy, right, or whatever you want to call it. And so you need to get married. And
Yeah,
so you need to make yourself marriageable. Absolutely true.
absolutely. Now, and if married, you focus on your spouse. First
And
Corinthians 7.
well, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
First Corinthians 7 speaks about having authority over your wife's body, your wife's body having authority, or your wife having authority over your body, for the purpose, I think, as we've mentioned before in another podcast, of saying yes to fulfill the sexual needs within marriage. Rich, I know you've written a lot about First Corinthians 7. So you want to take it?
well, when we've talked about that a little bit before, yeah, I have, and I think that 1 Corinthians 7 is interesting because it makes the point that a husband and wife have sexual obligations to one another in marriage. Okay,
Right.
sometimes we don't like to associate sex with obligation, but there's no getting around that. That's how Paul frames it. That when you're married, you have a right to your spouse sexually. And that does not open the door to something like rape or forcible sex or something like that. But it's just to say that when you marry, you are saying to this person, I will be sexually there for you.
Right.
I'm the only person in the world you can have sex with. And so when you want to have sex, I'm there for you. I'm the person with whom you will have sex. And I will make myself available to you in this way. That's what you're saying when you get married. And it's interesting in 1 Corinthians 7, it goes on to say that the only time a couple should refrain from having sex is if they both consent to it.
Right.
If one person wants to have sex, have sex. That's how it's designed to work. And part of that in that context is so that you will not be tempted. Paul's very realistic
Yeah.
about this. That if you have one spouse who is continually denying their spouse sexual fulfillment when they desire sex, then you're basically painting a bullseye on their back and inviting satanic temptation. And at the beginning of that passage, Paul says it's better to marry than to burn. Like he recognizes that sexual desire is this fire within us. And the answer, and I think we've said this on this podcast before, but the answer to sexual desire is having sex.
Yeah.
Is having sex within marriage. God's answer to sexual temptation is having sex and lots of sex within marriage. And I may have used this line on this podcast before, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself. But it's been said that Satan's plan is for people to have lots of sex before marriage and no sex within marriage. And God's plan is just the opposite. No to sex before marriage, but then
Right.
yes, to lots of sex within marriage. One thing that strikes me in the book of Proverbs is that when it talks about the adulterous woman and when it talks about sexual sin, it's very crass. The language is crass and there's nothing beautiful about it. Proverbs 30 talks about the adulterous woman who eats and then wipes her mouth and says, I've done nothing wrong. It's like she's eating with her mouth open and it's kind of disgusting. And she says, I've done nothing wrong. The way that sexual sin is portrayed is ugly. It's not poetic, it's ugly to make us realize that sexual sin is ugly. But in Proverbs 5, which you read one of the key sections of Proverbs 5, when it talks about sex within marriage, it's beautiful, it's poetic.
Yeah.
The language matches what's being described. There's something glorious about it. This glorious, exalted language is used. It's also interesting, it's drink water from your own cistern. Well, if you had a cistern in the ancient world, okay, think about living in a world that does not have much plumbing or anything like that, and you've got your own cistern, you're going to guard that cistern. That cistern is such a treasure. It's so valuable to you. And that's how Paul is describing a man's sexual relationship with his wife in marriage. It's something precious, valuable. It's a treasure. It's to be guarded. Obviously, your sexuality is not to be shared with anybody else. Don't let your water run out in the streets.
Right.
I think there probably is some innuendo when he says, let your fountain be blessed. You can figure that out. Yeah, it's just this beautiful picture of sex within marriage, and that's by design. So when Proverbs is describing sex that violates God's design, it uses this kind of crass, ugly language. When it's describing marital sexuality, he switches into this very exalted, poetic, and glorious language because he's describing something that is glorious. So I think that's really important to take note of.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because when I was studying through Proverbs, preaching through it, I did notice that whenever he's describing Harlot Folly sexually, it's almost like locker room talk. Like when I was playing football,
It's crass.
It's very crass. She's a deep pit. She's a narrow well. Guys are falling into her. Those are the types of things we used to say in the locker room about loose women. And it was just this, like you said, this ugly type of crass language. And then that's a good point because that is not the way he describes marital love.
Right.
And so it's just this total opposite. And just the way he writes shows how different they are.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned in verses 15 and 19 in chapter 5, uh, there is supposed to be frequency of sex in marriage, always intoxicated, overly filled with sexual love. It's supposed to be qualitative and quantitative.
Yeah. So a couple of things about the way it's described. There's a blessing in this. There's joy in this. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. And I think this is being written maybe to a young unmarried man is how I would
Yeah.
take it. It's counsel given to
Right.
the unmarried man, but it's written by a man who is married, who's now much older. His wife's older, but he still rejoices in her as the wife of
Right.
his youth. She's like a lovely deer, a graceful doe. These very elegant terms are used to describe the woman. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight, at all times. That's really important. And then be intoxicated. It's like she's a fine wine. And he is so filled with passion for her that it's like being intoxicated, but it is being intoxicated. I mean, there's a lot of talk about romance and what's happened to romance, and there's a lot of talk about how we've lost chivalry, we've lost all these things in our culture. But here's like, who would not want this?
Right.
Who could read this description and not want this?
Right.
Who would read this and think, I don't want to marry a woman that I can be intoxicated in her love for the rest of my life? It's just a beautiful, very attractive and compelling picture. That's what you want. And so part of what you have to do if you're a young man thinking about your future, you have to have a vision for what your future is going to look like. Bill's talked about not having a lot of sexual baggage that you bring with you into a marriage, and that's absolutely true. But you have to have a vision of what you want your future to look like.
Right.
And then you have to plot the steps that will get you to that destination. Proverbs is giving you a roadmap. If you want to get to this, if you want to have a Proverbs 5, 15 to 19 marriage, so a marriage that fulfills Proverbs 5 verses 15 to 19, that's what it looks like. Then Solomon is saying, this is how you've got to live your life. And if you go after Harlot Folly, that's going to be a really big problem. The other thing is, and this is where I think Proverbs is really politically incorrect, because I would say in the broader culture, but in some ways, this problem is worse in the church. Sometimes we joke, like, do women sin? Because very often the church will hammer men for their sins and not really talk about the sins of women. And our podcast is aimed at young men, so we're talking about things from a certain perspective for young men in particular. But there's what is called the all women are wonderful bias, which is basically the idea that all women are great and then men are the problem. All women are good and bad things happen because of men. The reality is Proverbs shows there are some women who are wonderful and there are some women who are really not, who are terrible. And you need to recognize there are two kinds, just like there are two kinds of men in the world, good and bad men, there are two kinds of women in the world, good and bad women. To say that there are bad women, to say that there are women who are not wonderful, to say that there are women who fit that description of Proverbs 7, and to say that there are women who sin in these particular ways, a lot of times the church won't even touch that. And certainly the world does not. And you'll be accused of sexism or misogyny or all kinds of, but I would just say the Bible cuts through all of that and it shows us reality. There are good and bad women in the world, just like there are good and bad men. You need to be a good man and you need to pursue a good woman. And if you marry her, you get a good man and a good woman together, that's when you get this Proverbs 5 kind of marriage.
Absolutely. And now when talking about 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and then Proverbs 5 and always intoxicated, always this and filled with their love, I guess the question might come, and I kind of want to preemptively deal with the question, is that some guy is going to say, how many times a week, especially if he's married, how many times a week should we be having sex in our marriage? And they'll look at national averages, this and this and this. But the reality is it's something that's worked out in your marriage. And so whatever the national averages are, you're going to have to work those things out and how many times that looks like in your marriage. Because there's some guys who say, well, I don't have any problems with 10 times a week. A woman says, well, I don't know about that. And then it could be a lot of variation. The point that Solomon is making, and he doesn't give numbers, he says, look, this needs to be going on a lot in your marriage.
Yeah.
You don't need to deprive one another in this way. So don't, as a young man, if you're a husband, you're not going to attract your wife by bludgeoning her, by telling her, I need to have sex this many times a week or whatever. Uh, you have to be the man that she's attracted to. Um, and you have to, and yes, there are obligations. We talked about that, but you do need to take her into account as well, and she needs to take you into account. And so that it's somewhere as you meet one another in the middle there, there's going to be satisfaction. There's going to be contentment with that. So, Rich, do you have any?
Well, yeah, part of being a faithful spouse, a godly husband, or a godly wife is making yourself continually attractive to your spouse. So the whole idea that you could get married and then let yourself go, which I think is a problem for both men and women,
Yeah,
quite honestly,
yeah,
for husbands and wives to get lazy and to not be a good steward of yourself. That's a big problem. You should be continually working to, and obviously we age and whatnot. You're not going to be this. Women have children, that changes their bodies. We age, that changes there's all kinds of things there. But the reality is what I have found, and and I think this is something that the Bible teaches, I think we can learn it from nature as well, is that when you marry and you bond, and if you are faithful to one another, and if you as a husband are seeking to be a loving leader, competent, confident, protect, provide, preside over your household, your wife is going to find you attractive.
hmm
And a lot of times when, if a man finds himself in a sexless marriage, it's because he has allowed himself to get lazy on those various fronts,
yeah,
and has not pursued his calling as a husband, as the head of his household, as the leader of his family well. So that's an issue. And obviously, if we were talking to wives, we would say you need to do within reason what you can to keep yourself in shape, to keep
right,
yourself physically attractive, to be soft and feminine, and to be the kind of woman who speaks to her husband with honor in an honorable way and honors his office, his role as the head of your household. And those are things that will help him continually find you attractive. So absolutely. I mean, that just loving your spouse, if you're going to love your spouse, that should tell you right there, you need to do what you can to be as attractive as you can. And what happens then is that, as say some of the as you're not as physically attractive, you're so bonded to one another that it doesn't matter as much as you age. And you
right.
have that Proverbs 5:15 to 19 dynamic throughout the whole course of your marriage, right
Right.
up to the very end. Now, you talked about sexual frequency within marriage. I'll just say this. Obviously, there are certain providential circumstances, a sickness or after birth, or you might have to travel for work. There are going to be times where you cannot have the sex that you might otherwise desire. But as a general rule, both spouses should be fully sexually satisfied.
Yes.
Christians should have the best marriages, the happiest marriages. They should have the most sex within their marriages.
Mhm.
And if we live according to God's design and the rules that God has given to us, the teaching God's given to us, the wisdom God has given to us in His Word, that's what you're going to get. We had, and I think this is a real testimony to the families in my church. We had and this still happens from time to time. It seemed like it happened. There's a window of time where it seemed like it happened just again and again and again. But we would have somebody join our church, and they would sit down with the session, and we do a little membership interview with them where we go over our membership vows
Yeah.
and talk about different things in the church, and we hear their story and all of that. And it always comes up, well, why have you chosen to join our church? I live in a city with lots of churches,
Mhm.
what brought you here? And one thing that we heard again and again and again is people would say, a lot of times it came from the wife. She would say something like, we were so glad to find a church where the men lead their families and the wives are happy about it. And I thought, man, there's just like nothing better you could say.
Oh,
To have a church where you've got lots of people with happy, and that is an incredible witness to the gospel.
absolutely.
We've talked about that before, how one of the purposes of marriage is to be, as Ephesians 5, to live out the story of the gospel in your
Right.
marriage, and through your marriage to present a witness to Christ's relationship with the church in your marriage. I'm like, well, that's happening. That's a wonderful thing. There's nothing better you could hear about people in your church than that as a pastor, to hear that you've got men who are seeking to lead their families, and you've got wives who recognize that this is God's design, and they're happy about it. Like they're satisfied. They're satisfied with their husband's leadership. So that's something that I think is really, really important. One other thing that I think needs to be said, and Bill, I'm sure you'll want to say some things about this too. I'm sure we've got people in our audience, because sexual sin is so widespread in our culture. We've got people who do have sexual baggage.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about the consequences of that. And some of those consequences can be remedied, some of those consequences persist. But what you need to know is that all sin, including sexual sin, can be forgiven.
Yes.
Jesus died on the cross for sexual sinners. Jesus died on the cross for people who look at pornography. Jesus died on the cross for people who fornicate. Jesus died on the cross for people who commit adultery. Jesus died on the cross for people who get abortions. Jesus died for sinners. And the reality is, it may be that some of the consequences of your sin will persist, because there can be temporal consequences that last, not eternal consequences, but temporal consequences.
Yeah.
But you should not live with guilt and shame that come from sexual sin. You should take your sin to the cross and leave it there. Nail it to the cross with Jesus and be done with it.
Yeah.
And it's really important, I think, because again, there can be such a strong sense of shame that comes with sexual sin. It's so important to know Jesus deals with that shame, and his blood covers that shame. Jesus died for sinners. He died for sexual sinners. He died for you. Trust him, look to him, keep your eyes fixed upon him. Know that he loves you, he forgives you, he washes you clean. You're accepted by the Father through the Son. And live that way. Live in the confidence of knowing that your sins are forgiven and that you're not a slave to your sin. The gospel not only forgives sin, but it also sets you free from the power of sin, so that you can say no to sin, to ungodliness, to wickedness, to perversion. You can say yes to what is good and right and true and beautiful.
Absolutely. That was well said. And I was one day assure these young men that there is forgiveness for sins like this, because it can be so shameful. But it is, as you mentioned, when God forgives us of these sins, it's not just this, well, you're forgiven, now continue in sin. He is saving you from this sin. This is what's destroying you. And he's rescuing you from what is destroying you. So the forgiveness is redemptive, and he's changing you. And so, but I also wanted to add and ask the question as we wrap this up. What if you're interested in a person who's been involved in sexual sin? You have forgiveness. But what if there's a lady who has been involved in a lot of sexual sin? We hear a lot about this. We hear a lot about women who party in their 20s. They hit this epiphany stage around 29, 30 years old. And the manosphere guys make fun of it. They come to Jesus, and now they're going to be redeemed, and now they're looking for a good man. Maybe they have a couple of baby daddies or whatever. And many in the church have said, what, if you're a real man, you'll husband her up, and you gotta be the white knight. You have the prerogative to say no. That may be a consequence of her sexual sin. Can she be redeemed? Absolutely. Are you obligated to marry her? No, you're not. You're not obligated to take on the responsibility. One of the things that you're not her rescuer. You're not forbidden to do it, though, if she's repentant. You need to check into some things. I think you need to be very wise. You need to understand the temporal consequences of sin. You need to understand that there are going to be effects, but she can be redeemed. And you can have a beautiful marriage with somebody who has had sexual baggage. Just like with you, if you've had sexual baggage, that can all be redeemed. And so it can with a young lady who's had that, who has been Harlot Folly, but has changed, has repented, and become Lady Wisdom. However, you don't need to get into things too quickly. I think you have a responsibility then to have a lot of questions, do a lot of examinations, get a lot of counsel about the situation. But I don't want young men to think that and to be guilted, to think that just because a young lady all of a sudden says, okay, now I want a husband, that it's the Christian thing to do if you're a real man to go marry her right away. You need to be careful. And I know some guys have gotten in trouble online. Christian guys have gotten in trouble online. I think of our friend Michael Foster, who got in trouble years ago for saying like that, something like that about single moms. And but it is your responsibility. You don't have to be the white knight. Um, but again, it's not totally off limits. It's not saying everybody who's had a sexual history is off limits now. But it does require you to be wise. It does require you to do a lot of investigation.
I think that's true. If she says, I've had my fun, now I'm ready to settle down, don't accept, that's not repentance.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
So
you never want to marry a woman who does feel like she's settling for you. I mean, in the sense that she dated better men than you in the past, but none of them married her. And so now she's going to settle for you. And you don't want to fall into that kind of situation. So yes, absolutely. I mean, women can be forgiven for their sexual sin just as men can. But you have to be wise about the consequences of that. And you have to be wise about what you're getting into and really discern her character. She's genuinely repentant. Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously, Jesus married a woman with a sexual past, so to speak, in the church.
right.
He turned a harlot into Lady Wisdom,
Right.
as it were. But that doesn't mean that's going to be your calling with, you just have to be very wise about it. And I think that's good counsel for men, because I've heard that too, where pastors will say, go marry that single mom and rescue her from her plight. Well, that may be terrible advice.
Right.
It just really depends. Is she genuinely repentant? And does she understand the sins that she was involved in? And is she healed from the consequences of that as much as possible? And does she understand what it would be like to be in a healthy marriage and what that would mean for her in terms of following her husband's leadership and submitting to him and all? So there's a lot there to think through. We live in a culture that is full of the wreckage of sexual sin.
Yeah.
We have to acknowledge that. And I would not want to discourage people from getting married, because we need more marriages. We need more family formation. We don't have enough people marrying right now. Our marriage rates are at an all-time low, just like our birth rates have crashed too. So, but you've also got to be very, very wise. And in a culture like ours, where there's been a lot of just sexual sin has been normalized, you have to recognize that there are going to be particular challenges that come with that. So you have to be very discerning, because you don't want to get yourself in a situation that is disastrous. And
Right.
we all have seen cases where that's happened. So yeah, I think that's absolutely true. So forgiveness is real.
Yeah.
Forgiveness requires repentance. And so recognize that in your own life, recognize that in the life of someone that you might be interested in, and then be wise. And I think at some point, Bill, we should do an episode on dating, finding a spouse, finding a wife, vetting a wife. And by that, I mean basically testing her fitness for marriage, making sure she's a good candidate for marriage, because a lot of men don't do that well and end up making very foolish marriages. So those are all really important things to talk about.
Absolutely. We can do that. Now, we went a little long today in this. And so if you're still with us, we're glad that you hung in there with us. And as we've gone through all these things, and kind of landed on that, just want to encourage you to find positive pursuits, pursue righteousness hard, and don't just sit around thinking about what to avoid. But in your positive pursuits, know that you're going to have to avoid Harlot Folly. She's coming after you. And so be careful and do the work. Until next time.